Hello and welcome to another episode of CSO What You Need to Know. This is the Cherokee Sheriff's Office podcast where we talk about all things that have to do with our agency. My name is Patty Pan and I'll be your host. I also work in the Office of Community Affairs here at the agency. Today's episode is on a topic that many of you have reached out to us on social media, on Facebook, on a number of platforms. We want to give you some info on the roadways, our roadways, and maybe correct some misinformation that may be out there. We're joined by Lieutenant John Brookshire with the Traffic Enforcement Unit. It's your guys who are out here on a daily basis. And since we're talking about traffic concerns, we thought you were the perfect person to talk to about this.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, kind of let us know about what is going on the roads these days.
Crazy drivers everywhere. We all know this. We all sit in traffic all day. And to be honest, traffic enforcement is very difficult in today's day and age for a lot of different reasons. And like you said, all of those comments on social media, I read every one of them. And I really just feel like there's some things that we probably need to educate the public about, and maybe they can help us out make the traffic conditions better.
What are some of the things that you think the public should know about, maybe the misinformation that's out there?
Well, first off, I think it's important for people to understand speed limits. Speed limits are a huge thing. Everybody knows that speed enforcement is, they think it's primarily done as a source of revenue generation. We don't do that here. We do it strictly for public safety purposes. If you look at our statistics, it's about 1 out of every 5 drivers that is stopped by the Cherokee Sheriff's Office receives a citation of any kind, not just speeders. But we don't set the speed limits. And what's really interesting is that there are laws in the state of Georgia that specifically talk about what is an enforceable speed limit and who is responsible for approving those speed limits. So in this particular case, the Georgia Department of Transportation has to sign off on a speed detection permit. And that speed detection permit tells the sheriff's office what roads we're allowed to run speed detection on. It tells us where on those roads we're allowed to run speed detection on, and it tells us what speed limit we are approved to run those speed detection devices on. So just because somebody feels like a speed limit should be slower on a particular roadway doesn't mean that we can just come out and lower that speed limit. Those speed limits are set by something called the 85th percentile standard. And it's a really difficult, kind of difficult to explain anyway, but essentially what the 85th percentile says is that if there's no other traffic on the roadway, 85% of the drivers would travel at this particular speed or within 5 miles of it because they feel safe driving that speed on that road. And so the Georgia Department of Transportation utilizes the 85th percentile to determine what a legal enforceable speed limit is. And that in turn goes on our speed detection permit. So that we receive a lot of feedback from the public about they feel that a speed limit is maybe too high on a particular roadway, a lot of them in subdivisions, and they want the speed limit lowered. The problem with that is if we lower the speed limit, then it becomes unenforceable by Georgia law. And so that's something I think that it's really important for people to understand. The other part about that is that we can't just go out and run speed detection on any road that we want to. We have to be approved not only by the Georgia Department of Transportation, but by the Department of Public Safety or the State Patrol. They're kind of the gatekeepers for who is approved in speed detection and what roads are approved.
Now, is that the same with when we're talking about stop signs, red light cameras, anything that has to do with speed?
Well, so they don't decide who puts up stop signs. That's actually controlled by the county's Department of Transportation. However, there are guidelines which even they must follow that are regulated at the federal level with the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It's a huge manual. It's about 900 pages long, and it tells us, how big certain signs have to be, what color they have to be, the distances that we have to have on certain speed roadways, and things like that. So, if somebody wants to put up, say, a stop sign in their neighborhood, there's a whole bunch of hoops that have to be jumped through, and even then, we may not be able to do it. But again, that's not really a function of the sheriff's office. That's County Department of Transportation.
Now, is that the same with, I'm just curious, speed bumps? Is that pretty much the same?
The speed bumps are a little different. They can be regulated in subdivisions through the Department of Transportation, but it would still go through them. There is a whole packet that has to be completed and approved and a process. And in my experience, it's not very successful just because you have to have, I think, 80% of the homeowners in a community agree to put in speed bumps. And that's really difficult in today's day and age to get 80% of people to agree about anything.
Now, earlier you talked about 85 percentile of drivers on a roadway, but every road is different, isn't it?
It is. And that's one of the things that the Federal Highway Administration has really started a big push in the last 5 years to get away from utilizing the 85th percentile in setting speed limits. Now they're recommending a little more comprehensive approach. The 85th percentile doesn't take into account anything other than driver speed. It doesn't take into account things that are on the roadside, road hazards, the type of, maybe it's in a neighborhood, things like that, visibility of curves or hills. So the new approach does take into account more of those factors. Unfortunately, it hasn't been adopted by the federal government yet, so it hasn't made its way into the manual and uniform traffic control devices. Once that happens, maybe we can reevaluate the way that speed limits are looked at in the state of Georgia, but currently we have to adhere to the 85th percentile.
And I'm sure a lot of our listeners or even viewers are asking this question, can't we just lower the speed limit or raise the speed limit at our will? I mean, if we think that it's too fast, let's just lower it. If it's too slow, let's move it higher. Why can't, I mean, it's got to be aggravating for your deputies to be out there enforcing something that you can't really control.
It certainly can be. We have roadways in the county where we believe from a public safety perspective, the speed limit is too high. But we can't go out as a county and lower those speed limits. At least we can't lower them and make them enforceable. So we could lower the speed limit, but then we can't run speed detection devices. So what good was lowering the speed limit? So in this particular case, again, to lower a speed limit and make it enforceable, we have to do a speed study to determine what the 85th percentile is. And then based on that 85th percentile speed, we have to set the speed limit within 5 miles an hour of that.
Have you heard your deputies come to you and say, our hands are tied, this is crazy, why can't we do this, why can't we do that?
I have. Frustration, and it really, it's aggravating because it's not a very well understood process. It took me, I'm coming up on my 21st year here. I've only really started to understand how speed limits are set in probably the last 5 to 7 years. And I've had to go seeking that knowledge myself. So I certainly don't expect the general public to have any concept on how speed limits are set and, when they're enforceable. In Georgia, there's, if I remember correctly, it's about 18 different code sections that talk about who and when and where speed detection devices can be utilized. Mm-hmm. So we can't just go out and, pick a random road in a random place and start stopping cars with speed detection devices, because then we'd be in violation of the law. And that, for obvious reasons, isn't good.
And there are a lot of roadways that your guys know are dangerous. They're dangerous. If we lowered the speed limit, it would help. But obviously, speed is a huge factor. Yes.
There are specific roads that we're aware of where speed is a factor. And it contributes to crashes. In fact, the problem in crashes is that speed really does kill, because what you're doing is you're increasing the energy of that moving vehicle. And when you increase the energy of a vehicle by increasing the speed, what it does is it means that it takes longer for your car to stop. And some people can't adequately judge what that distance is. So they're taking increased risk. And unfortunately, it's costing us lives right here in the county.
There are certain roads in our county that have, how should I put this, have more crashes, more accidents than others. Do you all patrol there more often?
We do. Cumming Highway, we have a significant number of crashes on Cumming Highway. Bells Ferry Road, those two are typically in our number 1 and number 2 roadways for crashes in the county. Town Lake Parkway has quite a few. East Cherokee Drive has quite a significant number of crashes. Hickory Flat Highway. And those 575 has a few on the northern end of the county. Even 75 has quite a number of crashes. State Route 92 has a significant number of crashes. I look at these statistics every single month, so I'm constantly looking at the top 10 roadways for where we're seeing crashes, and that's really where we're focusing our enforcement efforts to try to mitigate the crashes, because realistically, what the mission of the Cherokee Sheriff's Office Traffic Enforcement Unit is, it's to reduce the number of injuries and fatalities through traffic enforcement and education. And realistically, we have to do both. We have to educate people, and we also have to do enforcement. And unfortunately, enforcement means that sometimes we actually have to issue citations.
It just sounds like there's a lot of red tape. To get anything changed, you have to go through a process, which is good and bad. But if it were up to you, what would you change?
One of the things that I think we need to look at, as you said, there's a lot of red tape to change things. We talked about the speed detection laws. Most of the laws related to speed detection were enacted in the late 1960s. Georgia is a very different state today than it was in the 1960s, and I would certainly like to think that our legislatures would take a look at that and how effective those laws are in relation to the way that Georgia is today. Because, as I said before, Georgia's changed. Unfortunately, our law hasn't.
What should the public do? How can the public help? They obviously are voicing their concerns on a lot of these roadways, asking questions that sounds like our agency, our hands are tied. What can they do?
Well, I think this is an important first step to educate them on the process. But what they can do is they can reach out to their state representative and voice their concerns to them about the issues that they have that we can't control because the state law is in place, and only the legislature has the power to change the law. The sheriff's office doesn't. And reaching out to the Georgia Department of Transportation in some particular cases. Georgia Department of Transportation is responsible for maintaining the signage and setting the speed limits on state routes. Highway 92, Highway 140, State Route 20, 108, 369, all of those. So they're the governing body that's responsible for maintaining those roads if there's a pothole, things like that. And then, the county maintains the county roadways, and if it's inside a city, the city would maintain it. So, if they have concerns about, say, a state route, they have to reach out to the Georgia Department of Transportation because we don't have any regulative authority to do anything with those roads.
I'm assuming that this is a very touchy subject. Otherwise, legislators would have maybe changed this years ago because, like you said, since the 1960s till now, Georgia has changed a lot. Our population, our roadway. I'm assuming that's the case.
Well, certainly. I mean, do you want to be the legislature that introduces a bill that makes it easier for you to get a speeding ticket? And that's the dilemma, is that one of the reasons it is a touchy subject, because we're talking about obviously financially impacting people. And one of the things that I have seen on some of these commentaries is, why don't we use speed cameras? And we utilize speed cameras in school zones, but right now the way that the law is written is we can only use speed cameras in the school zones. Okay, it's not authorized for use anywhere else.
Oh. The speed cameras that we're talking about, I've seen speed machines. I don't know what they're called, but it says speed limit is 35, and then as you're going by it, it says you're going 45. What are those speed machine? What are those?
Those are we call them speed boxes, and we utilize those actually if we get a complaint in a neighborhood or on a roadway. We'll set those up, and not only do they display speed, but they track what the speeds of the vehicles are. And that helps us to determine whether or not we should focus some enforcement areas in that area, because of, if we have, say, 5 or 10% of the cars speeding through an area, we probably need to focus a little bit of attention on that roadway, especially if the average speed over is, say 15 or 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. But the problem with those boxes is twofold. For more mature drivers, they do alert them to their speed, and maybe they legitimately didn't realize that they were speeding. But we also see a younger and more inexperienced crowd that they want to challenge the box. And what I mean by that is they want to see how high they can make that reading go. So say if the speed limit's 30, they want to try to get it to 70 or 80 miles an hour. And so because of that, we've actually set ours up that after a certain number over the speed limit, ours don't display your speed anymore. They're still on, they're still recording your speed, they just don't display. The other problem with those is, at least the ones that we have, are battery operated. And those batteries, depending on the number of cars that come through a road, might only be good for 7, 10, sometimes 14 days. And after that, we've got to replace the battery. The other side of that is they're in high demand throughout the county. So we can't really leave them in any one place for a significant number of time because other people would like to see it on their road.
Yeah. Is there an option to put one of those on a highly traveled roadway like Knoxbridge Highway, where we see accidents and a lot of people speeding? I understand there's pros and cons to it, but because a lot of our public is asking, why can't we put speed cameras out there? Why can't we put trackers out there? Why can't we put anything out there?
So, and that's a great question. Part of that goes back to who's responsible for the roadway. Georgia Department of Transportation is responsible for the state routes. Now, I know that they are looking at a study with regard to Knoxbridge in particular. They are looking to a study to put some more signage or things out there. That's been discussed. I don't know where that currently stands, but that's certainly something that they could look at. But again, it goes back to the pros and cons of, you're going to have drivers that it will legitimately alert them and they'll, correct their speed. But then there's going to be other drivers who either want to challenge the box or they just don't care because they already know they're speeding.
We also get a lot of people on our social media asking, why can't you patrol there more? Obviously, there are accidents. Obviously, it's highly traveled. People are speeding. What do you say about that?
We're on Knoxbridge every single day. We're on Cumming Highway every single day. We're on State Route 92 every single day. The problem is obviously we have limited resources and we can't be on every single road in the county all day long. We have to respond to 911 calls. We have to respond to accidents and things like that. So, we might spend 45 minutes in one particular area, or sometimes we might spend 3 hours there. It really is dictated by what historically we have seen from the crash data. If we've got an area where we've got a lot of crashes, we're going to spend more time in that area. If we have an area where we only have a few crashes here and there, we might not spend as much time there because I don't want to say it's not utilized as effectively, because certainly there's speeders and things like that, but we're not having the crashes, and the crashes are where we're seeing the injuries, and that's where we're seeing the fatalities. And so those are the things that we're trying to mitigate first and foremost. If we do some speed enforcement and get people to slow down, that's great too.
Now, obviously, speed is a factor in a lot of these accidents, but it sounds like distracted drivers also?
Certainly can be. We see a significant number of distracted driving incidents in some of our more serious crashes. Unfortunately, that's one of the hardest laws to enforce for us, because we actually have to see that phone in their hand. We have to physically see it. And, everybody's been out on the road and you see people looking down in their lap and maybe their hands are down, but I can't see what they're looking at. And so if I can't see what they're looking at, I can't stop them and charge them.
Now, we have heard people say, but I'm at a stoplight. I'm at a stop sign. I can look at my phone, can't I? I'm stopped.
Nope. The law says that you must be legally parked. And by legally parked, I mean you are stopped in an area designated for parking. Not that you've pulled over into a turn lane and you've stopped at the end of the turn lane and you're doing your text message there. That's not a legal parking place, okay? So you need to be in a parking lot, in a driveway, something like that, if you need to, respond to that message or whatever you need to do.
Have you heard that before? People are like, well, it's a red light. I can look at my phone.
Unfortunately, I have. I've had this conversation with people on several occasions where I'm trying to give them an informal warning by, telling them to put the phone down at a red light because I'm in a marked patrol car beside them. And they've argued with me that, they're stopped at a red light. Frankly, if I had a law enforcement officer telling me that that's illegal, I think I'd probably take note of that. Back to how we enforce the distracted driving or even speed limits. One of the disadvantages that we have is that we, for the most part, have very distinguished cars, and most people see us. We've got a big light bar on top of our car. We've got, big noticeable graphics on the side of our car. And when they see those things in their mirror or beside them, they're putting their phone down. They're not doing it when we're beside them. They're doing it when we're not. So the public is going to see a lot more of that than I am riding down the road in my marked patrol car.
And we've talked about this before. I mean, we've talked about people driving too fast, speed, and then distracted drivers. But you also see people not wearing their seatbelts.
Yeah, and that's very unfortunate. Statistically speaking, in the time that I have worked for the sheriff's office, almost 60% of the fatal crashes that we have responded to, somebody that was involved and died in that crash was not wearing a seatbelt. So, in my experience, most of those fatalities could have been prevented had they been wearing a seatbelt.
That's got to be so, I don't want to use the word frustrating, but seeing this and knowing that it could have been prevented.
It's very frustrating. And there's some lengthy history to the seatbelt law in Georgia as well that goes back to the legislature. And I'm sure a lot of people are probably familiar that, up until several years ago, you weren't required to wear a seatbelt in a pickup truck. Of course, that's no longer the case, but I think a lot of people would be very shocked to find that there are still some exemptions to the seatbelt law. And a lot more people would be shocked to find it's only a $15 fine.
Not wearing a seatbelt?
It's a $15 fine.
That is unbelievable. That's actually pretty shocking.
Mm-hmm. And so my response to that is that, I think that we need to be serious about this because, when we have a fatal crash, we're closing the road for multiple hours, which is causing congestion. And, there's been studies that have been done to talk about how much that impacts the state economically. And if we could have prevented it because somebody was wearing a seatbelt, you're saving lives, you're saving money.
Part of this podcast we've talked about is to let our listeners and our viewers know that there are some things that we can do and some things we can't.
Right.
So what do you want our listeners and our viewers to walk away from this? The bottom line about, because we see the questions, we see their comments. Mm-hmm. Bottom line.
We read those comments. We hear your concerns. We are not turning a deaf ear to you. But we also have to follow the law. And, I get several calls to my office weekly to address traffic concerns. And one of the things that I always tell them is, we need your help to help do what you're asking us. And sometimes that means you need to contact your legislature. Sometimes that means that you need to contact another department, maybe whether it be the Georgia Department of Transportation or the county's Department of Transportation. Because there are certain things that are not within the scope of the sheriff's office to change. It requires another department or say the legislature to do so.
And I'm assuming this is not just the sheriff's, our sheriff's office. I mean, I'm assuming that this is everywhere. And pretty much all agencies have to partner with another agency to get things done, like changing speed limits, putting up signs, putting up cameras.
Yeah, because, when we talk about speed permits, like I said before, the speed permits are issued by the Department of Public Safety, the State Patrol. So if you're going to operate speed detection in the state of Georgia, anywhere, whether it be a county or a city, whatever it may be, you have to get your permit from the Georgia State Patrol, which means you have to adhere to the rules and regulations that have been set forth by state law. And the speed limits have to be approved by the Georgia Department of Transportation. So you have to go through those speed studies. So everybody across the state has to adhere to these same things. And, I've been across the state and I've spoken with a lot of officers, and a lot of them express the same frustrations that I do with regard to they get the complaints from the citizens, but their hands are tied. A lot of red tape. And like we said before, it's difficult to be the legislature that introduces that bill to make that change.
Now, earlier you also talked about the highly traveled roadways. Your officers, our deputies are out there all the time. And we've been out there. I've seen the road. A lot of times there's no safe place for them to even park, to do it. I mean, they're parked somewhere and you see them, but a lot of times where the accidents are happening, there's no safe place for them to be.
Right. We have a lot of roadways where the complaints are, they're flying through these curvy areas. And again, a lot of people are familiar that if we're going to operate speed detection, we have to be visible from a minimum of 500 feet. And a lot of these curvy roads don't provide us that visibility. And like you said, we've got to have some place that we can pull off. And a lot of times what we'll try to do is we'll try to find a homeowner that is agreeable to let us sit in a driveway. And that's assuming we can meet the 500-foot requirement by law. And there's been times, I've parked in a driveway and the homeowners come out and told us, you're not appreciated here, you need to leave. And at that point, we have to try to find another place.
We talked about a lot of misperceptions that are out there right now. Are there any that we did not talk about today that maybe you've seen comments or aggravated, drivers that just want to know why?
One of them that I think we touched on very briefly is that, speed enforcement or traffic enforcement as a whole is done for revenue. I can't speak for every agency out there. I would like to think that they don't, but I know for a fact that the Cherokee Sheriff's Office, we do not patrol traffic enforcement violations for revenue. We don't. I try to think of it like this. If I were to be stopped for what I am stopping this person for, would I expect a citation? And if the answer is yes, then we're going to issue a citation. We're not writing tickets for, say, having a headlight out or a tail light out. Okay. 9 times out of 10, we're going to stop you. We're going to let you know, hey, your headlight's out, your tag light's out, your tail light's out, whatever it may be. We're going to obviously conduct an investigation, make sure you don't have warrants or, any drugs or anything like that. And if you don't, we'll send you on your way with a warning. But there's other times where that 1 out of 10 times we might contact, say, a drunk driver. And in those cases, we do charge them with that headlight violation for court purposes. Okay. And it's really just a charging instrument for our prosecutor to say this is the reason for the stop. But ultimately, it goes to the bigger picture of, in that particular case, we're trying to get a drunk driver off the road as well.
Anything else you want to add about traffic enforcement in our roadways? We've talked about seatbelt, speed, distraction.
I think it's important for people to understand that, especially in our community, I think everybody recognizes that there is a need for improved infrastructure. I think there's frustration because they feel like, maybe the commissioners or the Department of Transportation aren't listening to them, but they are. The issue with building roadway infrastructure is it takes a long time. We have to project planning. They have to look at engineering studies. They have to secure funding. It's very expensive. So in a lot of cases, it can take 15 or 20 years to build a roadway or to expand a roadway. And unfortunately, because of some things that happened long before anybody that is currently working for the sheriff's office or the county commission or the Department of Transportation was in office, there were some things that happened that adversely impacted that. And we're trying to play catch up now. So that I think is something that's important to get out there, is that, we're working on that problem as well from the county level. And it's going to take some time. For example, Cumming Highway, the expansion of Cumming Highway, we knew 20 years ago that Cumming Highway needed to be expanded, and we finally got the Georgia Department of Transportation on board to expand that roadway. When they complete it, in I think another 3 or 4 years as the projected completion, we'll have a 6-lane state route through Cherokee County. And I've already talked with the engineers that are in charge of that project. One of the things that we wanted to address with them were concerns about having such a large roadway. And with the traffic, we asked them specifically, what is your design speed for this roadway? And so at the completion of the widening of Highway 20, Cumming Highway, the speed limit will remain 45 because that is the design speed of that roadway. And I think that's important because we're going to see a lot of growth in that area once that corridor is completed.
How often is there collaboration between the engineers and the jurisdiction that is going to be policing it?
Well, I don't want to speak to other areas, but at least from the local level, I'm in touch with our Department of Transportation several times a month, sometimes weekly. In fact, we're collaborating on a couple projects right now. And interestingly enough, going back to the speed permit has to be signed off on by the county engineer. So he is also responsible as a part of that process. So, we're looking at expanding some roads, adding some roadways to our permit that people have said that these are some concerns. We have looked at some traffic congestion problems together. And we've come up with some solutions that have helped to mitigate, some of those problems. And they look to us because we're in the field regularly, whereas they may not have the time and resources to sit in a particular area. And hey, if we just make this one tweak to this red light, we can get traffic flowing better, where we can offer that critique and they're receptive to it. And hey, let's see how it goes. And if that doesn't work, we'll try something else.
And that's really what I'd like to think is happening across, everywhere, that there is some sort of collaboration because the officers and the deputies are the ones that are out on the roadways. You guys are the ones that are seeing the accidents. You guys are the ones that are seeing the problems and the issues. So that is a good sign.
I'd really like to think that's the case. We have intersections where we discuss all the time. Just for example, East Cherokee Drive at Owen Store Road. I know we did a Facebook post a week or so ago about who has the right of way at that particular intersection. And there was some critique that maybe we should put in a yield sign for the right turning drivers onto Owen Store Road. Well, again, we go back to that manual on uniform traffic control devices that dictates when and where and how a traffic control device can be placed. And, other people have said, well, this intersection has it. Well, that intersection has it. Well, not every intersection is the same. And, again, it's a 900-page manual. It can be very difficult to read sometimes. So it's really important that drivers just be aware when they're at an intersection that they take that extra couple seconds to make sure that they are the one that has the right of way.
Well, speaking of that particular intersection, we did look into concerns from the community. People were asking, why can't we put a yield sign there?
Correct.
We looked, right? We asked.
Well, interestingly enough, I had actually brought that intersection. The director of transportation and I had talked about that intersection probably about a year ago now, about that putting a yield sign there. And he actually, when we got to talking about it, and he said we can't because that particular location is prohibited based upon the manual and uniform traffic control devices. So, again, we had already seen it. We had looked into it. We talked about it, but we can't because there's a regulatory document that says we can't do that.
And you and I talked about this earlier. You said to me, we're here to enforce the law, we don't make the laws.
Right. Yeah.
I find that to be a very strong statement and true.
It is. Regardless of how I feel about a particular topic, my job isn't to interject my personal opinion into it. It's to figure out whether or not it's a violation of Georgia law or not. And if it's what I would consider to be a serious violation or something that could jeopardize the safety of others, then we're going to take some enforcement action. And if it's something that I feel that I can provide somebody with a warning and they're going to take away that same learning experience, then I'm going to provide a warning. Again, our job is a mixture of education and enforcement.
Lieutenant Brookshire, thank you so much for your time today. I really believe that this podcast is going to be very helpful to a lot of our listeners and a lot of our viewers who are going to be watching this.
I really hope so.
Yeah, I think it explained a lot of why things can be done and can't be done, and situations where our hands are tied. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this today.
Thank you. And anybody that's checking us out here on this podcast, please, if you have concerns, reach out to us. Let us know what those concerns are. We do hear your concerns. We listen to them. And that's one of the reasons we're taking the time to talk to you today about, some of those concerns that we can't help.
To our listeners, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. We are starting something new. If you have a topic or something that you would like our agency to address, please feel free to email me at ppan@cherokeega.com, and we will try and get to those and do future podcasts on any concerns or questions you may have. Till the next time, have a great day and be safe.